Today I'm going to get some inspiration from OpenAI's tool called DALL-E. If you haven't heard of OpenAI, they're the same people that created the amazing ChatGPT that everyone's been going crazy about. So I really like Vaporwave aesthetics. I decided to prompt it for a nice Vaporwave sunset over a sea. The reason I also wanted to do this scene is I got this amazing cinematic ocean pack that I wanted to try out. So once I had my reference, it was time to start creating the scene. What did I do? I opened up Unreal Engine. The very first thing that I did after creating the project was placing the camera. Now the reason this is quite important is so that I know exactly what I will be shooting so that I don't focus on anything that's not going to be in the final render. After that, I wanted some light in the scene, so I added a plugin called Ultra Dynamic Sky. It's extremely affordable, and if you don't have it, no big deal, just use the normal Unreal Engine Sky. The biggest reason I used Ultra Dynamic Sky was just because I've got so much more control by tweaking thousands of variables within this plugin. And with Vaporwave, it's normally very pink and teal, and that's what I wanted to achieve with this sky look. The second thing that I did was I wanted to create a landscape. Of course, you can go model that landscape within Unreal Engine. I just have a tool called Gaia that you can download for free and try out as well. It's absolutely amazing. You can create extremely realistic worlds very quickly and import it into Unreal Engine via a height map. Since the mountains were mainly silhouettes, I didn't really care too much about the material, so I just used the very basic auto landscape material that I've linked in the description, and I just used the default textures that it came with. Once I had my camera, my landscape, and my sky set up, I wanted to add the water. So I enabled the water plugin that I was talking about earlier, and I dropped the water blueprint in. What I then did was I enabled infinite extent, which allows the water to cover the entire surface area of the map. The amazing thing about this water plugin is it looks extremely realistic when rendering. Not so amazing in the viewport, but it also gives you incredible flexibility around the waves and the materials that make up this ocean. The next thing I want to do is add a post-processing volume. Now, what a post-processing volume is it's a volume that you can drop into your scene and tweak stuff that you'd normally do in the post-production phase, such as bloom, lens flare, depth of field, and you can do it before you do your actual render. Now, what's really cool about this is you can set this up to specific scenes using the volumes, or you can enable infinite bounds, which will then allow this effect to cover the entire map. That is what we want, so we will enable it. What we want to do next is we want to enable manual exposure. The reason we don't want the default setting is because it auto adjusts the exposure as the camera moves. What's not nice about that is it creates weird lighting scenarios that you can't control. I like having full control over my renders. If you're using the normal sky, once you do that, you'll notice that everything goes black. Regardless, we'll have to push up the exposure to 11. If you're using Ultra Dynamic Sky, we're going to go into that blueprint. We're going to look for exposure. We're going to disable the automatic exposure so that it uses the post-processing volume. You should have something that looks similar, but now at least you know that the exposure isn't going to change as we move the camera. The other thing that I did was I increased the size of the sun just to make it more dramatic, and that can be done within the blueprint of the Ultra Dynamic Sky. I didn't add bloom just because it can be quite intense and it's something that you don't always want in your render. I'd much rather have control over it in post-production in something like DaVinci Resolve or Premiere Pro. So now that everything is set up, it's time to set up our level sequence. If you don't know what a level sequence is, it's just a big timeline that we can use to change locations and rotations and scales of objects, change the colors of materials, whatever your heart desires, and then we can save it so that we can render it out later. I wanted a very cinematic look, so what I did was I aimed the camera straight down to the ocean, and as it moved closer to the sun, I started tilting it up 90 degrees and exposing that amazing sunset. This creates a very mysterious but also dramatic look that looks absolutely beautiful. We do this by adding the camera to the sequence. We then keyframe each point of the animation. We'll add one at the front and we'll add one at the very back. The front facing down, the back moved forward and then rotated 90 degrees up. And then what we can do is we can play that animation sequence to make sure that we're happy with it before rendering. And that's the beauty of Unreal Engine is I can just view everything in real time, very close to what it will end up looking in the render. But this time around, I'm using the deferred renderer and not path tracer, just because it wasn't playing too nice with the sun and I wasn't getting the aesthetic that I was looking for. And here is an overview of my entire render setup. The one thing that you might see that's not very familiar to you might be the color configuration tab. And the reason that is there is to control the color space once we want to export it to an external editing software. Now there's a workflow called ACES, and it allows us to ensure that by the time we import it into a different application such as DaVinci Resolve, that we have the exact same colors as we had it in Unreal Engine. This is extremely important when you start doing color correction because the color is going to be accurate, it's going to save you a lot of time and pain, and this workflow exists to make your life easier. In short, you will need to download the OCIO configuration file from GitHub. We're using Ace's version 1.2. We will then create a configuration file in the root of your project if you want to, and then we will load our downloaded configuration file after extracting it from the zip file. We will then set up the settings as such. After that is done, we will move over back to our color configuration in our render queue, and we will go and update our color space configuration to the following. Like you see, I'm not going into too much details. There is an amazing video that tells you everything about this. You can find it right here, and it's going to take you about 10 minutes to get it set up correctly. After this is done, you're going to hit render, and it's going to take some time to render this out, depending on how high you've cranked your anti-aliasing, also depending on whether you've got denoiser activated in your post-processing volume. At the end, you'll have a result that looks absolutely beautiful. You can add this to your portfolio and you can share it with friends. I really hope that you were able to recreate this beautiful scene. If so, please share it in the comments. I'd be more than happy to check your work. And as always, I hope you had fun. Have a lovely day. Until next time.